I had to think of a creative name for it, so. All right, there we are. There's 3 of us. We'll see if Margie gets in here in a second. Um, she, she might just be having some technical issues, so I'm gonna get in here. All right, so at 6 o'clock we can go with this, and I'll check in for Margie and see if she gets in here. Looks like she's kind of fighting it a little bit, but that's okay. We'll figure out the technology. So tonight we are doing our second live stream. That is the LumaLearn live stream. I'm going to send out a link to this so that we can have people join us. Give me just a second. You guys can do the same thing if you want. If you go into the LumaLearn YouTube channel, you'll probably want to mute it because it's going to be a little delayed from us. So, and then just put that into your social media. That can invite people in and say, hey, look at me. I'm famous. I'm on TV or something like that. It's the same thing when it's YouTube. I don't know. All right. So we're live. No, it's much more casual. When you're on television, you have to have your stuff a little bit more together. When we live stream, we're a little bit more relaxed. So okay, so Becky, tell me a little bit about yourself. You want to introduce yourself? And
Sure. I'm Becky Coffey, and I live in Virginia, beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. It's lovely here at this time of year. I have homeschooled my sons. I have 4 sons, and I homeschooled them for 25 years, and they are all graduated. They're all college graduates. My youngest son graduates this fall from Virginia Tech, and it was just wonderful, a real blessing, and I loved every minute of homeschooling, so much so that when we finished, I was looking for something to do, and I discovered online teaching. And I have a Bachelor of Education degree and a Master of Arts in Teaching, secondary education, and I have one more class, and have my Master of Arts in History. But I decided I wanted to teach online because I missed homeschooling so much. So I started teaching online for Landry Academy, and then went to Big River Academy and LumaLearn.
wow.
So I love it. My husband and I also were the leaders of a support group in Ohio for many, many years, and a homeschool support group, and really enjoyed that as well. So that's a little bit of my background. I teach history, all things history, and I also teach music theory and composition online, and I teach different instruments here at LumaLearn, and I also teach music in my own private studio as well. So I've been doing that for a long, long time, and have enjoyed it tremendously. So
Awesome. I don't know where Priscilla went.
yes, she
Do you see her?
disappeared.
Okay, but I thought that was awesome what you said about that you enjoyed every minute of homeschooling, just because
I
I
did.
think that you nowadays you hear so much of that it's difficult, and that you just don't hear as much of that people enjoy it. So
Right.
it's such a
Yeah,
breath of fresh air when I hear that you enjoyed every minute of it. I think
I
it
did.
gives hope for those who are considering it, and maybe they feel a little bit intimidated by it.
Right. And that doesn't mean that every moment was pleasurable,
Right.
because when you're raising children, every moment is not pleasurable. And when you're trying to enforce doing schoolwork that is not pleasurable, that's not always, it's not easy. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's not the most fun thing, but I just enjoy the concept of home educating, and having my sons at home and being free. My husband's a minister, and we traveled quite a bit, and we were free to go and travel and
Wow.
school. We called it van schooling sometimes,
Yeah.
but we were free to do that. And then looking back on it now, I see the character that was built in our boys, and I can I give that credit to homeschooling for who
Right.
they are and their character. And so
Mhm.
I did love it. I had good mentors,
Mm.
um, Sally Clarkson, and back in that day, Greg Harris was around giving lots of classes and various ones. I can't think of everybody that
Right.
homeschool conventions were my lifeblood every
Yes.
summer, and they just meant a lot to me. So
yeah, I just checked, and oh, there she is. She
she's
just
coming. There she is.
okay, there she is.
You have no
Let's-
sound. Yeah, she's
Okay,
connected.
am I
There
in
you
now?
go. You're
You're
Right.
in.
in.
Yes, I'm in. Okay, let me see. I'm not sure if we're still connected on the live stream or not.
Okay.
Let me see what it's got down here. Okay. I guess this is the night of technical difficulties. Hey, get them all out of the way, right?
Right.
All right, so it looks like we're still in. So what did I miss while I was
just talking about homeschooling, and Christina was commenting, and that's it.
All right, great. So you guys just held it down without me. You don't need me. That's fine. We can go on our way.
Yes, we do.
All right. So Becky, you homeschooled your kids, and what is the most surprising thing that you learned about homeschooling?
The most surprising. Oh, I don't think I've ever been asked that before.
That's why it's a surprise.
Yes. The most surprising thing would be that we made it from kindergarten to 12th grade. Because at times, I would wonder, well, what happens when we get to middle school, or what happens when we get to high school? Will we be able to do this? And so the surprise was that it was a lot easier than I thought.
No major casualties?
No major casualties.
Everybody survived. Great.
We all survived.
Good.
Mom
well, I think that's an
included.
Accomplishment. I think that's a major accomplishment. Yes, for sure.
Right.
And the marriage survived. Which
it survived. Absolutely.
That's good.
And
I
was telling Christina while you were away that my husband's a minister, so we traveled a lot in ministry, and we would put all of our books in little crates, and we would van school while we were traveling. So we did a lot of different things.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
All right, excellent. So Christina, tell us a little bit about your experience and expertise in the area of teaching.
Yeah, sure. So I have a bachelor's degree in communication studies, but that was because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And communication studies was just a general degree that I was going to school. I just didn't know what the end goal was. And I am a former model of 14 years. So I was a model for 14 years. But then 6 years ago, Jesus changed my heart and my desires. And I quit modeling at the peak of my career. And since then, I have been mentoring and discipling young girls. And my husband and I, we currently lead Bible studies, and we each mentor. I mentor young girls. He mentors young boys. He has a testimony of his own, how Jesus changed his life. And we also speak at churches and events. We are originally from Romania, so we go to Romania often and visit prisons there and churches and just different events that we're invited to, and we just share what God did in our hearts. About 2 years ago is when I was introduced to the idea of online teaching, and I started online teaching, and it actually revealed to me my passion for teaching and for helping others. So my husband and I, we got married 2 years ago. So we've been married for 2 years. We don't have children yet, but the thought of having children and possibly homeschooling them is becoming more and more real as I'm hearing from others and just learning just online teaching. And I do currently teach with a couple other companies, but when I saw that LumaLearn is a Christian-based company and it's not secular, I got very excited because I want to teach about, my desire is to teach about books of the Bible, specifically courage and just examples in the Bible that can really encourage us all. So yeah, that's it.
All right, excellent. So we've got some different perspectives, and that's exactly what we like, so that we can kind of come at this from different angles. So the one question that I wanted to start us out with is more of just a thought and a discussion, and that is, So in the current environment, which we know is at the beginning of this year, nobody expected to be here. There's nobody that expected to be at this point, but everything has changed with schooling. And if you are a parent, or if you are a teacher, or anyone connected with the education system at all, whether it's elementary through high school or higher education, everything has changed for you. And so I came from a university setting, and now everything's adjusted to online and, kind of up in the air and whatnot, but, and actually international university setting. But the topic that I wanted to kind of touch on a little bit is the topic of pod schools, and they're called different things: micro schools, pod schools, or school pods, or community schools, or back in the day we called them co-ops, right, with the homeschool co-ops. So have you guys heard about these? Are you familiar with the concept? What are your thoughts on this, and how is this changing the environment of education in general, as well as homeschooling in particular?
Christina, do you want to go first?
Well, I would, but I haven't heard about that.
Okay.
So have you?
In my days of homeschooling, it was co-ops. That would be the same thing as pod schooling and micro schooling. And we would join up with a co-op, and maybe some parents would teach subjects that they were familiar with that I might not be so familiar with. And then I would teach subjects that I was familiar with. And we would just join together in a group, and the kids would have some socialization opportunities, and they would be together to learn. And they were great. And so a pod schooling would be online, and micro schooling mostly in this day, right?
Well, it's actually, as I've been looking at different people talking about this, and I think there's a lot of that's dependent on the regulations in the area, right. And that's both existing state regulations for education, because as we all know, whatever state you're in or country you're in some cases, it can be considerably different, the regulations for homeschooling from one to the next, right. With some being very strict and some being very lenient. I fortunately came through homeschooling in a very lenient, in Wisconsin at the time at least, was quite lenient. And we were always like, oh, we're glad we're not in Minnesota, because they have to mark down everything and keep track of everything. And we could just, go out and have adventures and call it school, go in the woods and pick up things and say, right. What is this, and research it. And that was school for us. So I think that it really depends on where you are, that there is a lot of online resources that are naturally being utilized with this. But one of the things that's interesting that I'm seeing is, in many cases, it's a physical resituation of the kids, because what we've got two primary issues. We've got education. How do we deal with education in this craziness that we're dealing with right now? And how do we deal with the fact that most parents, more than half the parents in the United States, are both working? And so there's not a stay-at-home parent in many cases. And so how do we deal with the fact that the kids are home, and maybe they're teenagers and they can stay by themselves? But then you have the issue of, if you've ever known a teenager, they're not going to sit there and do their homework while mom and dad are at work. That's not going to happen. I mean, usually, very, very rarely is that going to happen, unless you have some way to kind of drive them, encourage them. And then you have the younger kids where they can't stay home alone. And so I feel like the pods, it seems like they're being set up kind of to meet both of these needs. They're being met, the needs of keeping the kids safe and keeping them motivated and keeping them in an environment that's a social environment, which, as we know, is a really big need right now. These kids have been locked up with their parents, and everybody's going crazy at this point for months, abnormally. And then you've got the other side, which is the academic side, where now they're bringing in resources. So some of the resources that I'm hearing is they'll bring in a teacher, for example. They might say, okay, Christina, we want you to come in and school our 6 12-year-olds. together for 4 hours a day or whatever it happens to be. And then you just walk them through the main subjects, and in whether it's a self-study or if you write the curriculum or whatever it might be. And then in other cases, they may use online resources like LumaLearn or other online resources. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts as we're kind of going through this. And Christina, so you said you weren't really familiar with this ahead of time, but how is it that you think that this could either hinder or improve the learning of students? In your experience, how could this be a benefit or maybe a disadvantage for students that you've dealt with?
So I would say there are various reasons that people homeschool. And now a lot of people are homeschooling out of necessity. They didn't choose to homeschool, but they're having to because of their school being closed, or else they don't want to risk sending children to the school system. The other side is someone who has felt led by God or felt led to homeschool based on maybe their religious preference or character training or something in that situation. So I think it would kind of depend on your goal for homeschooling. If you are wanting to be the primary instructor and you are wanting to teach your own children, then the pods and the co-ops, they might be able to support you, but that wouldn't be something you would be looking for to teach all the time. So for example, the example you used was, for a teacher to come in and teach 12 students together. Well, that might not be what you're looking for. But if you are homeschooling out of necessity and you don't have many other options, and maybe you do need to work a couple of days a week or a few hours a day, that is definitely an option, because I'm assuming the class size would be rather small. And you could have a teacher who either was certified in that subject, or maybe a parent who had a love for that subject and it was their delight, and maybe they would come in and want to teach that subject. And so I would see it as an advantage to be taken by the parents, something that would help and maybe be something in your toolbox that you could use to help you along your homeschooling journey, temporarily or for the entire 12 years, whatever you plan to do.
Yeah.
I would look at it as a positive thing, not a negative thing.
Sure. And I think there's
co-op that way for us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of parents that are, first of all, surprised at how appealing homeschooling has suddenly become, and how doable homeschooling has suddenly become because of resources like the pods or the micro schools or co-ops, and also because of online resources. And so, I mean, there's tons of resources anyhow. Those of us that have been in homeschool for, decades, we've already known that there's many curriculums, there's lots of books and lots of resources, even before Google and really widespread internet.
Almost too many.
Yeah, well, now it's a matter
confusing.
Of choice. I was at the dollar store, and it was interesting because I was watching some YouTube videos on homeschooling, and saw some parents that were saying, go to the dollar store. If you don't know how to homeschool your third grade, and granted, this is not necessarily going to be suitable for high schoolers, but hopefully at that point you already have some resources in line. But for your third grader or even kindergartner, go to the dollar store, and they have so many workbooks there that you can start with that. Just start with that, figure out where your kid is, and then go from there. And if you're doing something with them, it's better than doing nothing. And then from there you build on it. And it's taking some of that panic away. I think there's so many parents that are like, I'm going to mess up my kids if I do this. And you're not. No. You're the parent. You know your kid. You might not know how to homeschool, but you know your kid.
Right.
So you can kind of see these things, and there's so many resources out there. So I do think that the pods, the micro schools, can be a very positive thing.
One of my things is to make learning fun. And what you want to avoid is putting a child at a desk in a room alone day after day with a workbook in front of them. That's not making learning fun. And so the pods and the micro schools would serve that purpose, to give them something to look forward to and something fun. But even with workbooks, like from the dollar store, you can make those fun. You can add to that and make it lots of fun. You want your child to always have a love for learning, and you don't want to
Yes.
destroy that love for learning.
Yes.
So whatever you can do to keep them loving to read, loving to to learn about history, to learn about science, that's what you need to do.
Absolutely. And Margie's back with us now. She had some technical difficulties at the beginning. So you're on mute, Margie. So unmute yourself and come in and join us. So we're talking about the school pods and the micro schools and co-ops. We touched on this a little bit in our conversation before, but I'm not sure if you've gotten in on what we've been talking about, or if you're just dealing with the technical issues. Okay. It happens. I had technical issues too. So these guys held it down for me. So we're good. So the questions that we're asking is, how is it that the pods and the micro schools can help kind of get the parents through this time of uncertainty? And what are some of the advantages, but also maybe what are some of the challenges that they might face? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, whatever was being said when I came in, I wholly agree with that. And I would, in my way of thinking, I mean, I homeschooled all my kids, they've all graduated, and we did co-ops from the beginning, right? And they were always a great asset to our homeschool. And I sort of look at the idea of the pods and the micro schools as the same thing as a co-op. It just depends on, in these days in your state, if you can meet physically or not, or how you can manage social distancing or whatever your community believes. But they encouraged my kids to have an audience. If we were doing poetry memorizations or to present to, we used to meet once a month just to present what we'd been doing. That always encouraged my kids just to step it up just a little bit in front of their friends. It was fun. And, you're drawing on the other community to kind of build your, let's just say, I hated crafts. I don't really hate them, but I go out of my way if I'm doing it for more than my kids, and my kids did. And so they may have somebody who's much better than I am at crafts. And so you group your strengths.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Right, for sure. Well, and that kind of brings me to what Christina was telling us about her teaching, and her focus is on the discipling and really training the character of the person. And one of the questions that we were looking at is, how can we best prepare our kids for college? Now, in this situation right now, there's people that are, again, being thrown into the homeschooling situation that never thought they would be homeschooling. And so their kids are halfway through, or maybe even in their senior year, or entering into their senior year now. How can they, this is probably the most difficult time, I would say, for homeschooling. That's one of the reasons my mom put me in the private school for the last couple of years, because she just wasn't up to it. But Christina, how would you go about preparing them? And I'm not even academically, but more spiritually or more emotionally, preparing the kids to go on to that next step. And it might not even be university. Maybe it's going to be a professional career or something like that.
Yeah, I know that if it's not a community at school that they have, that a lot of times they have that at church. And so they'll have friends at church, and then they'll learn in the youth ministry at church, student ministry, children's ministry, and so forth. And so I know that that's helped a lot too. But in regards to actually teaching them just characteristics, godly characteristics, and as I would want to teach my children, I would look at just examples and opportunities that arise in our everyday lives, and just talk to them and go through, why we made this decision, why we wouldn't make the other decision. And we can't protect them from seeing everything in the world, but if there is something that they have a question about, or for example, if we're watching television and something comes up, rather than saying, no, don't watch that, we can bring it back to the Word of God and talk about, hey, why would you say this is not right before God? And so we would break it down and teach them courage and strength, trusting God. And that's how I would bring it back to God's word, the foundation of where the truth is. And I would go based off of that. And then also just let things arise. For example, if we're at the grocery store and somebody is rude to me, how did I react? We can take situations like that arise in our everyday lives and just talk about it. Hey, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think that mom should have done, or what do you think that she should have done? And so that's how I would go about it. And of course, surround them with people who have the same faith and are able to encourage one another and build one another up. And that's how I would go about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the challenges that we're facing with this whole change is that for much of their lives, the parents have really been outside of I mean, as far as parents whose kids have been in either private or public school, the parents have been outside of that moral formation, whether it's, Christian or not, whatever their morality is, whatever their belief system is, the parents are kind of not in the middle of that. And this is the first time really in history that this has been the norm, that parents were not in the center of really teaching their kids, the idea, for example, things of, interacting with people that are different than us, and this is a big topic that we have now, interacting with people that are maybe older than us or younger than us or come from a different community or look different than us, have a disability or what we might see as a disability. These are things that parents are in the middle of. I mean, they do teach it to a certain point, and they teach them when they're young, but as they get older and older and older, most of this influence is coming from the public schools. So now it's solidly back in the hands and the lap of the parents. So I can imagine that being a little bit intimidating from some of these parents that maybe have sophomores or juniors or seniors that they're now trying to get through and get them graduated and, have them come out stronger instead of coming out with some of the problems that may come from some of this the shutdown and just being isolated and whatnot. So Becky, what do you think about that? What would be your advice? Now you have actually homeschooled and you have children that have gone to university.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've made that transition. So what is some of the advice that you might give for somebody who says, how do I get my kids to be successful in the next stages, whatever that might be?
I grew up, I have one brother who's much older than me. So I grew up, my parents were older and I grew up alone, and I had not been around parenting. So I had to learn as I went. I had never been around homeschooling. So I had to learn as we were working through it. And I found having mentors or I love books. My husband and I both love books. So we loved homeschool conventions where we could buy lots of books, and we would attend the conferences and glean everything. I took notes like crazy and glean everything that we could from the speakers of what we could do to encourage our children. We used every resource that we could find. I love doorposts. They have lots of character training things for all ages. And I probably had everything they had at that time. Sally Clarkson was a great person who mentored me through all of those years. But the one thing that I always felt was very important was not to over shelter your children. I come from a very conservative background, but we felt that our boys needed to learn how to interact with others. And so we joined at that time Boy Scouts. We joined 4-H. We were part of co-ops like Marji mentioned. We also were in church all the time and Sunday school and traveling in the ministry. We did all we could to do things that we could be with our boys, and so that we could oversee that our beliefs were not being trampled on or undermined at all. And then as we got into high school, we would give them more freedoms to do their choices. So it's kind of like a little tomato plant. You keep it in the greenhouse at first and you baby it, and then gradually you put it out until it's ready to be planted in the ground itself. And that's kind of how we looked at parenting. And so at first, Boy Scouts 4-H, we were always there. And then gradually we'd let the boys do their own so they could learn how to navigate through everything. And so by the time they left home to go to university, thankfully we had 2 huge universities and a wonderful community college in our area. So the boys, maybe the first year or so, I think every one of the boys was at home, living at home while going to university. And then they branched out a little bit. But they made the transition very, very well. It was not a difficult thing. I think they were maybe shocked at some of the literature they had to read because we had been Christian based for years. So maybe some of the books they had to read and things like that were kind of shocking to them. But because they had a solid Christian base and a solid church base, I think they were able to deal with those things. And as far as brand new homeschoolers, I would say just develop a friendship and a relationship with your children. If they don't know how to communicate with you, you're going to lose a lot of wonderful opportunities to mentor and to guide them. You need to keep the communication channels open and flowing so that they feel free to come to you if they have a question. Even once they get into university, if they don't know how to deal with a situation, they can come back to you and not feel awkward or strange. So I feel like relationships and communication are absolutely imperative.
And that's whether you're homeschooling or not.
Exactly.
That's in any environment for sure. Yeah. Margie, what do you think? You've been through a similar bringing up your kids and getting them through homeschooling. So what are some of the solutions or some of the challenges you've had transitioning them?
Well, that's such a big question. I have 6 kids. I have 4 who've graduated from college, and 2 who did some college and then chose to go into the workforce instead. And like, I love the tomato plant greenhouse analogy, and I did a study of that one time when I was kind of stressing over this, and to finesse it a little bit, it pointed out like we lived for 5 winters in northern Maine, and that growing season is very short. Well, I think some tomato plants never come out of the greenhouse because the variety of plant determines the harshness of the conditions. They are ready to be set outside. They have different degrees of hardiness, I think you would say, and they are ready to leave the greenhouse at different times. And I think your kids are like that too. Some are more susceptible to, they may have that bent in them of a spirit of rebellion, and some are just not. And so it really depends on the kid. But to prepare for college, we did a little bit of dual enrollment. Some people do. It was not good for us. It was a major time taker, and we used local tutorials, and actually they were better education than the community college. It was nice. My first daughter was on the soccer team in college, and it was nice to have some credits out there, but the literature was disgusting for the most part, very edgy. And, she was 16, and there's still time to build in. I mean, why not choose good quality literature that deal with the same issues, but deal with it from, let them do it from a thinking adult perspective, or you have creation versus evolution. Well, when you get to college, you have very reasonable, intelligent, educated people standing up and teaching something that maybe you've brought them up not believing. If that's the first time they've encountered a reasonable argument against it, you really haven't equipped them. I think during those teen years, that's when you bring the hard questions in and say, where is the truth? So you bring those big questions in. And that's why I love high school, because you still have them there. You can deal with, really, some of them are ready to deal with those adult issues, but you can still deal with them within the framework of faith, or in maybe your local tutorials or places like LumaLearn. You can have somebody with similar beliefs who are saying the same thing that might not sometimes when it's coming out of your mouth, they reject it,
Right.
True.
depending on. So I love having others speak into my kids' lives from a position of faith that have similar beliefs rather than attacking. Like at our local community college, one biology teacher is I think he's still there, it's very hostile to faith and any faith-based, and you will deal with that. But if you've built up the responses and the thinking processes, really thoughtful processes during high school, I just think they're more equipped to meet because like was said, my daughter's soccer team, she just said, Mom, I never knew girls did stuff like that. Just really, or talking about things. Long story, she became a theater major, but she was given a role.
Which is almost even worse because the theater world is pretty bad too. I came out of that.
A secular college. And I remember a discussion we had. She says, Mom, my character has to swear. And what do you think about that? And I said, well, I just think it's not for me because it's coming out of my mouth.
Right.
Even if it's a character, she goes, but it's the character. I said, I understand that. And I couldn't give her the answer for her. I knew what I hoped, but is there another door? Can we resolve this a different way? But she had to deal with that.
Right.
But
yeah, I think that's really good. One of the things that, and I'm coming from a different perspective because I don't have kids similar to Christina, so we're on the other side of that and the teaching side. But coming from the university side, and also the fact that, I've gone through so much university myself and in many different environments, mostly in secular schools, but, now my doctorate is in a Christian university, but I have been in those environments and I've encountered those very close-minded professors who say right in the beginning, if you say anything about creation, you get an F.
Yeah.
Right from the get-go, and you're like, well, how is that open-minded at all? But one of the things that, shameless plug, one of the things that I focus on in a lot of my LumaLearn classes is, or in teaching in general, when I'm teaching, my university students in Haiti or whoever it is this idea of critical thinking. And I think this is something that is so important, especially once your kids get into high school. And even before that, we need to start pushing them into a place where they can process these things and give them the confidence to say, you're going to make some mistakes. I'm not saying don't make any mistakes, because I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. We all make mistakes. It doesn't matter. You continue to make mistakes. The question is not to raise your children so they do not make mistakes. The idea is to raise your children so that they can evaluate those mistakes more or less before they come, and they can weigh that and say, okay, like your daughter's in theater, and well, if I refuse to say this word, is that going to keep me from being able to be successful in this field? And that's a very real danger. Or if you're in science, or if I have to get through my biology class and I can't speak of what I believe, and whatever that happens to be, it might be a religions class. And I've been in those environments where world religion class, and I'm in there, and everything is so twisted and so pushed against the Judeo-Christian ideals. How do you survive that? And teaching them the critical thinking at the beginning can be really valuable, because even if they have to say, write on their essay, this is what the professor wants me to say, right, and in order to get the right grade, this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to give your argument, even though I don't necessarily adhere to this myself. But then that can help them to work through that, because so many times they get so bombarded with this indoctrination that is very, very liberal, very, very agnostic or atheist, very, secular, and not in every case, but in many cases they're so surrounded by this, and it's hard to come out of that a thinking person, because there's so many people around you saying you have to think this way. So that's the reason I think that really get your kids into critical thinking classes. And this might be the thing where you have to go online, or you have to hire a tutor, or you have to take my class on LumaLearn, or whatever that happens to be. But find somebody that can teach your kids how to question, and even question what you think is true, because truth will prevail. And if they learn how to look at it and how to weigh it and how to evaluate it, they're not going to walk away from that. There's a scripture that says, train up your child in the way they should go. When they're old, they will not depart from it. That doesn't mean they're not going to make mistakes. That doesn't mean they're not going to stumble. That doesn't mean it's going to be 100% correct, because we're not 100% correct. That means that that's going to be a solid foundation for them. So I think that critical thinking is a big part of that. And I also think that trusting them, we have to trust our kids to make those mistakes, and also trust them to work their way through the mistakes. And the mistake is not the end of the world. There's literally no mistake that your child can make that is the end of the world. There's not. I mean, you know, short of something that would result in their death, I mean, that would be the end of the world for them. But, you know, other than that, there's not anything that is going to be the end. There's nothing that is, you know, they can't come back from. So let them have that. Let them go out there, give them some freedom, but give them a lot of guidance as well, because kids need guidance. They want guidance. Mm-hmm. So that's my advice from that. Anybody else have a thought on that?
Yeah, I just have an example. I'm sorry, Christine.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I have an example. My son was in a very liberal university, my oldest son, and very liberal university. He was only there because it was close to our home and it was easy to go. But he had a professor who gave an assignment that was the most vile thing I have probably ever come across in an assignment. And he had 10 choices that they could choose from to write this paper on. They were all vile, totally uncalled for, and I would even think unacceptable. And my son brought that home to us and said, what am I going to do? I don't even want to think about any of these things. How am I going to write about it? And so my husband said, well, you know, you have a choice. You can choose one and write about it, knowing that, you know, that's not how you believe and that you don't even want to think on those subjects. Or you can go to your professor and say, I don't believe any of these are acceptable. Can I write what I believe about something here? Which is what he did. He went and asked the professor, and the professor said, sure. And he's an excellent writer, but he wrote an excellent paper telling why he wouldn't do any of these assignments, and he got 100. The professor was just very proud of what he had done. And so that was very close to the beginning of his university career. He has a PhD now in public policy, but that was very, very close to the beginning of his career. And that really spoke to him. Oh, I can make a stand, and I'm not going to be kicked out of school if I make a stand. And so I was really proud of his choice, and it really spoke to him.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of professors do that on purpose. Coming from the perspective of a professor, I ask my students difficult questions, and many questions that I know they'll disagree with, and sometimes even I disagree with, but I'll put like very almost inflammatory statements out there and say, okay, what do you think? Because I want them to think.
Right.
That is what professors really want. Sometimes we, as generally conservative Christians, will say, you know, and this is, you know, a lot of homeschoolers are, but, you know, now it's definitely broadening. So there's a lot of secular homeschoolers as well. But this includes, sometimes you're so in this mindset that if I go, for example, if somebody is secular and they put their kids in a class at LumaLearn, or if I am Christian and I put my kids in a very liberal university, it's the same sort of thing. Are they going to be indoctrinated? But so many times the teachers, the professors, they just want your kids to think. So if they're showing that they're processing it, you don't have to agree with me. You just need to show me that you're thinking, that you're processing something here, and I'll be happy. Christina, you had a comment on that too.
Yeah, I wanted to comment also on what Margie said. You had mentioned just that you would want someone possibly younger to mentor your children, and maybe even just say exactly what you're saying, but it's coming from someone younger. And sometimes when I am involved in student ministry, or I am mentoring young girls, many of the parents, I'll keep in contact with the parents, and they'll say the same thing. They'll say, you know, you're telling them what we're telling them, but it's coming from you, and they know your background, they know that you're younger, and so forth. And so I just wanted to say that that's huge, and that a lot of parents, and I think I would want that too. You know, God willing, if I become a parent one day. And so I just wanted to say that. And then also, you had mentioned about your daughter, how she was in theater, and back when I was modeling, you know, around the time that that I quit, you know, I was doing pretty like safe things, like modeling for Crocs, modeling for Skechers, you know, doing commercials, makeup, hair, you know, and it was great. I was making great money and I was traveling, but I quit knowing that they were okay with my conservative views, but I knew that if I gave them a pinky they would want more. And I knew
Yes.
how it was on set. You know, they hire you, they hire all the makeup artists and the photographers, and they say, oh, it's just going to be from the neck up, it's just going to be beauty, it's just going to be jewelry or makeup. And I just knew every time, you know, especially I think in my whole career, you know, I grew up in a Christian home, but I also struggled with God's love and believing that He loved me the way I was. And so I believed the lie that that I had to adhere to my agency, and so I had to make sure that they loved me, and so I had to make sure I looked the part, and I had to make sure that I felt accepted. And so that really hit home to me, and I was in that world for so long, but God loved me and took me out of that world, and He gave me just a new mind and new desires. And it's just something that, you know, sometimes you do have to say, hey, I can't, even if there's 1% chance that it's going to take me on the wrong path, it's not worth it, and I can't have both. I have to choose one or the other. And what God gives is the most amazing thing ever compared to what the world has to offer. So I just wanted to make a couple comments on that.
I agree with that. I have one more thing. It's taking your story about the professor and the vile assignment. This was not my children, but these were two local homeschoolers who were dually enrolled, so they were not graduated, they were still in high school. And they took an English class at our local community college. And one of the assignments is to go see a play. Well, the play was not, you know, it was R-rated at the minimum. And both of these students, different families, went to the professor, and I know their parents, this is how I know this happens, and said, we do not want to see this particular play. Could we do an alternate assignment and you will even do more? And she flat refused. She said, no, you see it or you take a 0. And they took the 0. Well, this professor wrote a letter to the editor in our paper about how high school dual enrolled high school students should not be in a college class because they didn't have the maturity or the strength and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking they had the maturity to go to their professor and disagree with her and ask for an alternate assignment rather than just, you know, compromise their values. So I think that takes a lot of maturity. I wouldn't want to see that play. I'm pretty mature, you know, so you sort of have to be prepared, you know, to stand on that, you know, to take the consequences if the professor is not as accommodating.
That's an important thing too, that we really need to be teaching kids, is to be able to stand up for something even when you're not going to get agreement, even when you're not going to get an A because you wrote a great paper. I have done that. I have stood up and said, you know, I can't agree with this, and taken the bad grade and just said, you know, I would rather do that than to compromise my beliefs. I've done that in work, and I've done that in school, and they're going to come across these inevitably. I do not care what your belief system is. It does not matter where you stand. It's going to be tested at some point. Their belief system is going to be tested, and they need to have the ability and the confidence now to say, okay, this is where my line is. Because if you don't have that line, what's left for you? Politics? I mean, that's kind of it, right? Politics or used car salesman, I don't know. But you have to, if you don't have that line somewhere, then what are you compromising for? What is the point anymore? Just to make everybody happy? Nobody's going to hold you in any sort of regard or anything. So yeah. So there's one more question, and this is completely off topic, but I thought it would be an interesting question to ask this particular panel. And Becky, I don't know if you speak any foreign languages, but Christina, I assume that you speak a few.
I speak Romanian, just one.
You speak two because you're speaking in English. So you speak
Right.
two. Okay. Margie has studied several. I've studied several. Becky, was that a?
I studied Latin and Spanish and Greek, but I can't speak any of the above.
Oh, that's okay, because sometimes it just takes studying and being able to get through and understand them.
Right.
So this is a big interest for parents, is the language. So parents and kids are stuck at home, and they need to get their kids exposed to language, not just because it's required to get through school, because it is, but it's also because it's really important for life. We are in such a global community that having a second language, especially a language like, French or Spanish or something like that, is so incredibly useful for life. And, Margie can tell us that, and Christina can tell us a little bit about that too. And so how do we get these kids able to learn a language from home? I mean, there's the online programs, and I'm not just talking about put them in the course. I know there's course. Margie offers great courses. We've got other people on Lume that offer great courses. I offer courses on how to learn a language, because that's just an important skill there. But how do kids get in an environment where they can actually be learning the language when they're by themselves? They don't have anybody to practice with. What do you think?
I think that I wish that we would have had this online opportunity when my boys were learning languages. We didn't have it. We had Rosetta Stone, or we had, there was another one, Margie might, Power Glide or something like that, that we had way back then. That's all we had. But I think that these online classes are just tremendous for that very reason, because they have someone else who can speak the language, who is speaking it to them and helping them through it step by step. Whereas if you're just, reading a textbook or doing an online course alone, you don't get the chance to interact. But like with the online classes here at LumaLearn or the other online schools, you have a chance to interact with somebody who actually speaks the language and makes it fun. And so I think that's a wonderful way to go to teach a foreign language, and to have your child interact with someone who also speaks that language. I think that's great.
I would say you're singing the song of my people, as they say. It has been a lifelong interest with me. And I have developed some real strong opinions about this, but I would say for about 20 years, I was pretty traditional. I found a new way of teaching. So one thing I tell my students, I would think if you're learning a new language or learning Romanian or whatever it is, it's kind of like you bought an app for your device, and you've got to install and upload it to your brain. And so what I tell my kids, we're going to spend a year or two maybe uploading and installing, and there's not going to be much coming out because you can't really speak it until you have something in your head to put out. So getting home alone ways to put input that the student understands is a great precursor to being able to meet with a live person. I mean, it's always great to have a live person who say, okay, we've installed this much, we're just going to play with that much language until there's more there. But so I teach classes, I sort of use a text, but you have music videos. I give my kids covers, like for Spanish, I'll find covers of songs, worship, hymns, praise, secular, pop, covers in Spanish, and I give them a song a week. They read the lyrics and they sing along. They're putting it in their brains. They're reading simple things, putting it in their brains. Little kids, videos of things they know, they're putting it in their brain. So the input they get when they understand it, get a familiar book from the library, have somebody read it in Spanish, they point to the pictures. So playing games with what they know. So my philosophy, especially with younger kids, is any input that is pleasant, that it's like, oh, I've got to go do French again, but oh boy, okay, well, let's explore this part of French. Or we're going to watch somebody cook croque monsieur, and then we're going to make it and see if we can, a variety of input that they understand is really powerful in them acquiring that language in their brain. And then when they have the opportunity to speak to somebody, being able to use what's in there. So that's my
Margie, do you still teach the class where you you go to a different country and they speak a little bit of each language?
I do. On my own
Yeah.
platform, we do 6 languages in 1 semester.
That's it.
Yeah.
I always have looked at that class and thought, oh, I wish my kids could have taken that, because when they got to high school and they had to choose a language, like, what do I choose? How do I know what I'm going to need later in life? But if they could have had something like that to just kind of learn a little bit of each one and spark their interest.
We do 2.5 weeks of Spanish, French, German, Italian, Russian, and Arabic, which are the ones I've studied, and I don't speak all those languages. I always encourage them to get a native speaker to pronounce, but we learn the same scripture, the course, the same set of things, so that they have a drop of experience when they go to choose a language. And you'll find kids who never thought of Italian think, oh, this is fun. You just open the door to choices. And I'm limited. I'd love to do Japanese and Chinese, but I don't have that experience. So
yeah, Christina, what do you think about that? You're a bilingual.
Yeah, I agree with Margie. I think that, so I grew up in a Romanian church, but at home I spoke English, and I, with my friends I spoke English, and then I would watch TV, and at school I heard English. So other than church and hearing people at church speak Romanian, one of the things that really kept my Romanian fluent throughout the years was music. And so I loved Romanian music, and so I loved to sing. And so I knew all the songs by heart, and I would listen to what they said, and I would know the meaning, and I would just, it really helped me. And, and growing, and not all of it was Christian, a lot of it was like secular or pop, but I just loved the beat. And so that really helped me the music really helped me to keep that Romanian, and also going to church and hearing Romanian that way. But I agree with Margie in regards to what she said with just practicing a new language. Or, for example, if I have a child and I speak Romanian, I would probably introduce music to them as well. And then also maybe have them take a class from someone other than me, maybe. And then also, so knowing that I know Romanian, then we will do some hands-on practice and practice speaking it at home and ask questions, and maybe bring him or her around the Romanian community, and so that they could hear Romanian language at church or at a picnic or something like that. So that's how I would go about it.
Yeah, interesting. I was thinking about our original question about the micro schools and the school pods. I wonder if there's people that are putting together bilingual or immersion settings of the micro schools. I think that would be fascinating to say, okay, this school pod is going to be Romanian, and this school pod is going to be Arabic, and this school pod is going to be Japanese. I think that could be a very interesting opportunity for students to get that. I mean, why not? If you need to do it anyhow, why not find a teacher that speaks those languages as a fluent native speaker, and have them teach your kids. But I'd notice, Christina, that was what you're talking about with the music, and Margie too. That is one of the things that I noticed as a aspiring linguist, polyglot. One of these days I'll call myself a real polyglot. I call myself a baby polyglot now, but and as a English teacher and as a vocalist, I noticed that the people who speak the best English, who are not native English speakers, are those who listen to a lot of music, because it's so much easier to get the pronunciation down, and you just memorize the language and you get into the flow of the language. It doesn't feel like as much of an obstacle. But talking about what language to choose, I think, Becky, you mentioned this. What language do the kids choose? And this is a big deal, because we have a lot of choices, and you have, I mean, there's how many thousands of languages in the world right now, and you can learn almost any of them right now if you get there. I mean, some are harder to learn than others because the resources are less for some than others. Studying Haitian Creole is much more challenging than studying Spanish because just the number of resources there. But those resources are available, but deciding which one to pick, I think, is important. And so I would suggest even that parents take 6 months or 6 weeks or whatever the case may be, and just explore languages and give assignments like, okay, if you got Netflix or YouTube or whatever it is, find a series. You think you want to learn Russian? Okay, find a series and see if the story, see if the characters, see if the flow, see if this is interesting for you. Listen to the music, decide if you like it, and first put them into this environment when they can choose, I like this language or I don't like this language, because if it doesn't connect with them, it doesn't matter how much you think it's going to benefit them, it won't connect. It's like making your second grader take piano lessons when they hate piano. You know, it's not going to work. I have seen this happen over and over and over. It's not going to work.
Believe me, as a piano teacher, I can attest to that.
They've got to be, yeah, they've got to be, you know, they've got to buy into the idea of it, or it's just not going to be successful. So I think giving the kids an opportunity, I'm a big proponent of helping the kids, the students, choose which way they want to go. And so let them choose what language they want to study, and then find the resources with them, because the resources are out there. There's amazing resources now that, you know, like you said, Becky, they didn't exist when I was a student. They didn't exist when I was trying to learn back in the day. I had books. And so I tried to learn Japanese, and my pronunciation is way off, but people would still pretend they could understand me sometimes. So that was a long time ago. I don't remember any of it. So, all right. Do we have any parting words that you ladies would like to share?
I would just say enjoy the journey. It's a lot of fun. You'll never have this opportunity again to be such an influence on your children and to have them with you and to enjoy it. So do what you can to make it pleasurable and fun, and just love learning.
Yes. Anyone else?
Priscilla, did you color your hair?
I did color my hair.
It looks good. It looks good.
It's actually supposed to be a really deep blue, but because my hair is so dark, it just kind of turned black. So
I noticed it from the first live. So
yes.
your hair was lighter. I'm all, did you color your hair?
It was lighter and had the gray in there, and the ends were all sunburnt from, you know, living years in the tropics and whatnot. So yes, exactly.
Looks good.
Good. All right. Well, it was great having you ladies on, and I want to remind everybody that's viewing this, we have a few live viewers, but most of our views come after the fact. But if you want to catch us live, we are going to be meeting Tuesdays at 6 o'clock Eastern time, and this will be an ongoing thing. We'll have different teachers coming in, some from LumaLearn, some from outside of LumaLearn, but we do want to get you guys introduced to our great teachers here. So we've seen Margie a couple of weeks, and Becky, Christina are new to this. We're all new to this. This has been 2 weeks old, so just face it, we're all new to it. So, but yeah, leave your comments, and we will take a look at those and try to get those answered, or at least addressed, and we'll give you our opinions, and see you guys next week.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, you guys have a great night.
Thank
You
you.
too.
All right, bye-bye.